My sociopathic in-laws smiled as my mother died, leaving me to scrub diner floors. They thought they had buried a worthless peasant. They never suspected a stolen slice of cherry pie would hand me a billionaire's empire and the exact weapon needed to orchestrate their absolute, bloodless ruin. They called me a parasite. They called me a peasant, a bottom feeder, a piece of dead weight dragging down their precious bloodline. For years, my in-laws orchestrated a relentless, agonizing symphony of psychological torture, designed to strip the flesh from my bones and watch me shatter into a million pieces. They thought they had won. They truly believed the crushing weight of my dying mother's medical bills and the grease-stained linoleum of a dead-end diner would become my quiet, miserable grave. What those arrogant, cruel people did not realize was that a ghost, a forgotten, discarded old man entirely invisible to the rushing world, was about to hand me the keys to their absolute destruction, and an empire I never asked for. All it cost me was a single, stolen slice of cherry pie. At When Home Hurts 2 welcomes you. If you have ever felt the suffocating grip of a family's cruelty, or wondered if your quiet, desperate endurance will ever be rewarded in the dark, I urge you to subscribe to our channel right now. Your support gives us the vital strength to keep exposing these profound, hidden truths of the human experience. I am Vera. I am 68 years old today, and looking back at the sprawling, unpredictable wreckage and beauty of my life, I am eternally haunted by one quiet question. What happens to kindness when it is offered in the pitch black? When there is no audience, no applause, no leverage to be gained? Does it dissipate into the void? I have survived enough venom to know the absolute truth. Kindness is a silent currency traded in the shadows, possessing the terrifying, unadulterated power to rewrite destiny. The town of Clearwater was not a place where destinies were typically rewritten. It was a bleak, decaying speck on the map, a purgatory trapped beneath a perpetually weeping slate-gray sky. At the bruised heart of this town sat the Main Street Diner. It was a haven of rhythmic, suffocating white noise. The air hung thick with the sharp, bitter tang of scorched black coffee, the heavy, caramelized grease of fried potatoes, and the quiet despair of shattered American dreams. Through the fogged window panes, the relentless patter of freezing rain fought the violent hiss of the flat-top grill, drowning out the hushed murmurs of tired mechanics and hollow-eyed nurses huddled in duct-taped vinyl booths. In those days, long before time painted my hair silver, I was the woman pouring their coffee. I wore a stiff, faded blue uniform that smelled permanently of cheap detergent and stale frying oil. My worn white sneakers absorbed the brutal, bone-jarring impact of standing on cracked linoleum for 12 hours a day. To the outside world, and especially to the monstrous family I had married into, I was utterly worthless. I was a housewife who couldn't keep a house, a leech clinging to their fabricated prestige. They spat their insults at me, daily doses of poison meant to make me feel infinitely small. But inside the suffocating walls of that diner, I moved with a silent, unbreakable defiance. I drifted between tables with a patience that bordered on the monastic, hiding the bone-deep exhaustion settling into my marrow. I did not view the patrons as mere interruptions in a miserable day. I saw them as fragile, desperately lonely souls seeking a flicker of warmth in a profoundly cold world. My detractors failed to comprehend a fundamental truth. A person's worth is never measured by the pedigree of their name, but by the sheer, expansive capacity of their heart in the face of profound suffering. And my heart, bruised and bleeding as it was about to quietly shift the invisible orbit of the universe. That quiet shift began not with a grand epiphany, but with the steady, agonizing beep of a hospital heart monitor that counted down the remaining days of my mother's life. She was a woman woven from sunlight and sacrifice, a gentle soul who had broken her back scrubbing other people's floors just to ensure I had shoes for school. When the cancer came, it did not arrive as a polite visitor. It was a ravenous thief that hollowed out her fragile frame and left behind a mountain of suffocating medical debt. The hospital bills cascaded into my mailbox like a daily avalanche of despair, each envelope a cruel reminder of my utter helplessness. I was married into the prestigious Sterling family, a bloodline that prided itself on old money, immaculate country club lawns, and a chilling, sociopathic lack of empathy. My husband, Richard, viewed my mother's dying not as a tragedy, but as a vulgar inconvenience. The Sterlings possessed a terrifying kind of wealth, the kind that insulates you from the gritty realities of human suffering. When I begged them for a loan to cover her experimental treatments, my mother-in-law, Eleanor, simply adjusted her pearl necklace, her eyes as cold as polished marble, and whispered that natural selection should be allowed to run its course without the interference of their checkbook. They saw my desperation as a symptom of my low-born breeding. To punish me for my audacity, Richard severed my access to our joint accounts, leaving me entirely destitute. They engineered a psychological prison, restricting my movements, mocking my grief at their opulent dinner table, and demanding I perform the role of the smiling, obedient wife while my heart was being fed through a meat grinder. Their cruelty was an art form. They chipped away at my sanity with perfectly timed insults about my clothes, my intellect, and the impending, pathetic demise of my mother. I took the job at the Main Street Diner because it was the only place in Clearwater that didn't require Eleanor Sterling's blessing to mop the floors. The diner became my sanctuary of grease and grime. Earning $3.15 an hour plus meager tips, I hoarded every single crumpled dollar bill in a rusted coffee tin hidden beneath my floorboards, praying it would be enough to buy my mother one more vial of painkillers. I worked the graveyard shifts, scrubbing coagulated ketchup off the linoleum on my hands and knees, weeping silently into the bucket of dirty mop water so the patrons wouldn't see my tears. The physical agony of the labor was a twisted relief from the psychological torture waiting for me at the Sterling estate. My in-laws laughed at my grease-stained hands. They paraded their wealthy friends past the diner windows just to point and sneer at the peasant they had graciously allowed into their family, waiting for the day I would finally snap and crawl away into the dirt where they believed I belonged. But they underestimated the furious, quiet endurance of a daughter trying to ease her mother's passage into the dark. Yet, it was precisely within that suffocating darkness of my mother's fading light and my in-laws' relentless venom that the universe sent an invisible messenger. He appeared on a freezing Tuesday in November, dragging his left leg slightly, enveloped in a threadbare, oversized trench coat that smelled faintly of wet wool and decaying autumn leaves. His name was Elias, though I wouldn't know that for a long time. To the rest of the diner staff, he was just the vagrant, a nuisance who occupied the corner booth near the drafty radiator. He had a face mapped with profound sorrow, his skin like crumpled parchment, and eyes the color of a faded, stormy sea. Elias never ordered food. He would carefully extract a single bruised quarter from his pocket, place it on the formica table with trembling fingers, and ask for a cup of hot water and a slice of lemon. For hours, he would sit perfectly still, nursing that pathetic cup, watching the world rush by outside the rain-streaked window with an expression of unfathomable loneliness. My manager, a petty tyrant named Carl, despised him. Carl would frequently threaten to call the police, loudly proclaiming that the diner was not a homeless shelter for human garbage. Every time Carl shouted at the old man, I saw my own mother's vulnerability reflected in those tired, stormy eyes. I knew what it was to be viewed as a parasite, to be treated as an unsightly stain on the fabric of someone else's perfect day. A silent, unspoken covenant formed between Elias and me. Whenever Carl retreated to his office to smoke, I would intercept Elias's table. I never pitied him. Pity is a luxury of the comfortable. Instead, I offered him the dignity of a warm smile and a full pot of freshly brewed coffee, sliding the bruised quarter back across the table into his waiting palm. We rarely spoke, but in the silence, there was a profound mutual recognition of survival. The true turning point arrived on a violently bitter evening, a night when the snow fell so thick it choked the street lamps. I had just received a call from the hospital. My mother had slipped into a coma. My chest felt as though it were wrapped in barbed wire. As I mechanically wiped down the counter, I saw Elias shivering in his booth, looking weaker and more translucent than ever before. In the display case, a single, slightly crushed slice of cherry pie sat neglected, slated to be tossed into the dumpster at midnight. It was against Carl's strict policy to give away expiring food. He preferred it rotting in the trash over feeding a hungry mouth. But something inside me, a tiny ember of rebellion born from my grief, ignited into a roaring flame. I plated the pie, heated it until the deep red fruit bubbled, and poured a generous amount of fresh cream over the top. I carried it to Elias and set it before him. He looked at the steaming pie, then up at me, his weathered lips trembling. A single tear escaped his eye, tracing a jagged path down his cheek. "For the cold," I whispered, squeezing his frail, icy shoulder. He ate it slowly, savoring every bite as if it were a holy sacrament, completely unaware that this simple, stolen pastry was about to detonate the very foundations of the Sterling family. The memory of that sweet cherry tartness would soon become the very seed of an earthquake that would violently shatter the ground beneath all of our feet. 2 weeks after I gave him the pie, Elias stopped coming to the diner. I searched the frozen faces on the street, hoping to see his tattered trench coat, but he had simply vanished into the brutal winter. A few days later, the hospital monitor finally flatlined, and my beautiful, broken mother breathed her last. I buried her in a cheap pine box on a gray, unforgiving morning. Richard and his parents did not attend the funeral. They were hosting a charity gala for rescued greyhounds, deeming it far more pressing than mourning the woman who gave me life. Returning to the cavernous, cold Sterling mansion that night, Richard coldly informed me that since the embarrassing ordeal of my mother was over, he had filed for divorce. Eleanor had already packed my meager belongings into trash bags and left them on the servants' porch. They were finally discarding me, tossing me out into the frozen night with absolutely nothing. I was sitting on my garbage bags in the freezing rain, waiting for a taxi I couldn't afford, when a sleek, jet-black town car slowly rolled up the gravel driveway, its headlights cutting through the sleet. A sharply dressed man stepped out, his polished shoes crunching against the ice. He didn't look at the mansion, he looked directly at me. He was a senior partner at the most ruthless law firm in the state, and he had spent the last 48 hours tracking down a diner waitress named Vera. When we sat in the sterile warmth of his downtown office the next morning, he placed a heavy, leather-bound folder on the mahogany desk. It was the last will and testament of Elias Thorne. The man I had known as a shivering ghost was, in reality, the reclusive patriarch of a terrifyingly vast corporate conglomerate, a billionaire who had spent his final months wandering the streets in disguise, seeking a single, genuine act of humanity in a world that only loved his wallet. As the lawyer read the documents, all the oxygen left the room. Elias had no heirs, having outlived his estranged children, and he harbored a deep, cynical disgust for the sycophants who circled his failing health. His will was explicit, ironclad, and vengeful against the greedy. He left nothing to his board of directors. Instead, he transferred the entirety of his liquid assets, his expansive real estate portfolio, and his controlling shares in Thorn Industries directly to the woman who had given him a stolen slice of cherry pie when he had nothing to offer in return. I sat paralyzed, staring at a bank statement with a string of zeros that my mind could not comprehend. But the true shock, the revelation that made the blood freeze in my veins, came when the lawyer handed me the list of Thorn Industries' subsidiary holdings. Elias owned the commercial bank that held the Sterling family's massive, over-leveraged debt. He owned the land beneath their prized country club. He owned the very oxygen my monstrous in-laws breathed. With the unimaginable weight of Elias's legacy now resting in my trembling hands, the time had come to answer their years of venom with absolute, silent ruin. I did not scream, I did not cry, and I did not hire a lawyer to fight Richard's insulting divorce settlement. I simply signed the papers, granting him the illusion of victory, and walked away into the shadows to orchestrate his destruction. The Sterlings operated on the arrogant assumption that they were untouchable, but their wealth was a fragile house of cards built on generations of predatory loans and secret corporate borrowing. As the new, unrevealed CEO of Thorn Industries, I spent 6 months meticulously tightening the invisible noose. I quietly instructed the bank to call in their outstanding commercial loans, citing breach of covenant clauses they had ignored for decades. I initiated foreclosure proceedings on their flagship properties. I systematically bought out the suppliers for Richard's manufacturing firm, quadrupling the prices overnight and bleeding his profit margins dry. The collapse of the Sterling Empire was a spectacular, bloodless slaughter. By the time they realized a hostile entity was dismantling their lives brick by brick, they were entirely bankrupt. The climax of their demise arrived on a sweltering July afternoon when the bank legally seized the Sterling estate. I parked Elias's black town car at the end of the driveway and watched as the sheriff's deputies escorted Eleanor and Richard out the front doors. Eleanor was weeping, her pearls clutching her throat, her face stripped of all its haughty, aristocratic makeup, revealing the terrified, hollow shell of a woman who had finally been violently separated from her vanity. Richard looked like a cornered rat, shouting emptily at the deputies. When they saw me step out of the car, flanked by the legal team that had orchestrated their eviction, the horrifying realization crashed over them like a tidal wave. They looked at the grease-stained peasant they had tortured, realizing too late that they had been bullying the architect of their complete annihilation. I didn't say a single word to them. I didn't need to. I just looked at Eleanor, offered a very small, polite smile, and turned my back on them forever. Today, as I watch the sunrise paint the Clearwater sky in shades of gold and bruised purple, I sit on the porch of the sanctuary I built for families drowning in medical debt. The money Elias left me was a weapon, yes, but once the monsters were slain, it became a plowshare. I bought the Main Street diner, fired Carl, and turned it into a community kitchen where no one is ever turned away and where cherry pie is always served warm. The ghosts of my past, the cruel laughter of the Sterlings, the agonizing beep of my mother's monitor still echo in the chambers of my memory, but they no longer possess the power to wound me. When people ask me how a waitress conquered a dynasty, I never speak of vengeance. I tell them that kindness is the most dangerous, subversive force in the universe. It is a seed planted in the dark, watered by unseen tears, capable of growing into a leviathan that can crush empires. You never know who is watching you in the shadows, waiting to see if you will offer them a sliver of your light. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe rewards your quiet, desperate endurance by handing you the match that will burn the house of your abusers to the ground. Vera's journey is a powerful testament to the triumph of quiet endurance over loud, systemic cruelty. Trapped in a suffocating marriage with the ruthless Sterling family and burdened by her dying mother's medical debts, she found solace in the grueling labor of a diner. Her world was defined by the relentless mockery of her in-laws and the agonizing grief of impending loss. Yet, in the darkest depths of her suffering, she refused to let her heart turn to stone. Her simple, unprompted act of kindness toward Elias, a disguised billionaire whom society had discarded as a nuisance, became the catalyst for a monumental shift in destiny. When Elias left his vast empire to the compassionate waitress who offered him a stolen slice of cherry pie, he did not just give her wealth. He handed her the scales of justice. With calculated precision, Vera orchestrated the absolute financial ruin of her abusers, exposing the fragile, corrupt foundation of the Sterling dynasty. But true victory was not found in vengeance alone. By transforming her newfound power into a sanctuary for those crushed by medical debt and turning the diner into a haven of community support, Vera proved that the greatest triumph over cruelty is the weaponization of radical empathy. Her story reminds us that true wealth is not measured in bank accounts or country club memberships, but in the enduring grace we extend to others when we have nothing left to give. Kindness is not a passive trait. It is the most formidable, subversive force in the human experience. In a world that often rewards ruthless ambition and punishes vulnerability, extending genuine compassion to those who cannot offer anything in return is an act of profound rebellion. True character is revealed not in how we treat the powerful, but in how we acknowledge the invisible. The universe operates on an unseen economy of grace, where the smallest seeds planted in the dark can eventually grow massive enough to shatter the very foundations of injustice. We interact with invisible people every day: the exhausted cashier, the custodian, the stranger struggling with heavy bags, or a coworker going through a silent battle. You do not need a billionaire's inheritance to change a life or to shift the energy of your environment. Start by intentionally acknowledging the humanity in everyone you cross paths with. Offer a warm smile, a listening ear, or a simple word of encouragement to those who are often overlooked. When you are forced to navigate toxic environments or face cruelty, protect your boundaries, but absolutely refuse to let their bitterness extinguish your inner light. Practice radical empathy as a daily habit, knowing that the quiet good you put into the world inevitably shapes the reality you will eventually inhabit. Question: have you ever experienced a time when a small, unexpected act of kindness, either one you gave or one you received, completely changed the course of your day or your life? Please take a moment to kindly share your thoughts and stories in the comments section below. We would love for everyone to read, discuss, and draw inspiration from your unique perspectives. If you found value in this story and its message, please hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Your subscription is our greatest motivation to keep producing and sharing more high-quality, meaningful content with you in the future.